All right, welcome back to NFL Rundown from talkSPORT Endzone, your dedicated NFL YouTube channel from talkSPORT. We are just over 5 weeks away from the 2025 NFL draft, and there's going to be a huge amount to get into over the next 5 weeks. We are going to be getting on draft experts. We're going to be looking at key players. We're going to be speaking to some of those who should be hoping to get called in the early rounds and hear their name on that stage from Roger Goodell as well. But we have to just for this episode, just go back and clean up some of the stuff that's happened from free agency, some of the remaining deals that were to be done. I'm Will Gavin. I've got Brian T. Higgins Smith with me as well. And look,
I like that, Will. That's cool.
Let's start off with
wait. Breaking news. Breaking news again for the second straight week. Well, this is amazing.
Go on.
Aaron Rodgers has signed. No, never mind.
I really thought that was real then, and I was like opening.
I got you again.
I was like opening up, like, oh my God, what's Schefter tweeting and stuff like. We're going to talk Rodgers later in the show because it's getting ridiculous at this point.
No, not with Aaron Rodgers.
But let's start off with last night, the Cincinnati Bengals announcing that they have managed to finally lock down their two-star wide receivers long-term. Ja'Marr Chase agreeing to a record $161 million contract. It's an extension, so it's $182 over the next 5 years. Ja'Marr Chase and Tee Higgins signs a $115 million deal. Can be worth over $30 million a year with incentives. So they have the highest paid wide receiver in football and potentially a top 5 wide receiver in football as well if the two are paid as such. And look, it means
because they won the AFC Championship.
Yeah,
they won their division, they made the playoffs, and they're rewarding greatness. I love it, Will.
And look, because the team that won the Super Bowl last year in the Eagles have $108 million per year invested in their quarterback and their top 2 wide receivers.
Yeah.
There is a world where this works, right?
Yeah.
$124 million per year invested in Joe Burrow, in Tee Higgins, and Ja'Marr Chase, and those are 3 guys who you do not want to out of your building.
It's almost 50% of their salary cap, which is mathematically, financially, just fascinating in so many ways.
And look, the kind of the things to get off the chest before anything else is to say that if they'd done this earlier, if they'd done Tee Higgins 2 years ago, if they'd got Ja'Marr Chase signed last year, they would be saving approximately, as of this year, $25 million to $30 million on the cap.
Which is a couple of good players in the NFL.
Well, it's either Trey Hendrickson plus a couple of role players, or it's 4 or 5 starters on a defense which needs 6 or 7 starters. So it's not an insignificant amount of money. The point is that yes, these players deserve these contracts, but yet again, Brian, the way that the Bengals do business is just farcical.
How many times have we written stories at talkSPORT.com where we'll use a pull quote, so it'll be a quote that kind of gets you into the story. It's your hook, right? And you're basically repeating it because it's worst run organization in the NFL, horrible ownership, on and on and on. The Cincinnati Bengals, for whatever reason, the Dallas Cowboys, there's a few, Cleveland Browns, there's a few teams that just don't do it right. And for the Bengals, it's been an issue for years, to the point that, Joe Burrow literally spent the last year publicly campaigning like he was a politician that Cincinnati could not let, obviously, Ja'Marr Chase go. He's one of the best receivers in the NFL. Justin Jefferson, we can have that debate. And couldn't let Tee Higgins go. Tee Higgins' mom reportedly at some point got into it. This has been a back and forth for a year now that the Bengals have created. Because what I always find so funny, Will, is that in the end, it'd be different if they didn't pay them. Or you made a really hard decision and you signed Ja'Marr Chase and you traded Tee Higgins. Or you let one go. Like, whatever it is, they paid them. So if you pay them, you were always going to pay them. Why not do it earlier? Why not be in a better salary cap position? But in the end, they had to do it. And it reminded me very much of last year at the start of the season with the Dallas Cowboys, with Dak Prescott, to where everyone freaks out about the contract and, oh my gosh, but they had no choice. It was their choice to wait that long. But, the Cincinnati Bengals right now, they're not a true, at this moment, contender. But they have something. They're in the conversation because they have Joe Burrow, because they have Ja'Marr Chase, and because they have Tee Higgins. And that is a threesome. That's a trio that's very dangerous. That gives you one of the best offenses in the NFL that has continual upside. They can put up 40 points a week on you. If you lose Ja'Marr Chase, what do you have? If you lose Joe Burrow's best receiver, what do you have? So the Bengals had no choice to do this. It just doesn't make sense salary cap wise. It doesn't help them as they try to get past Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore, a loaded AFC. And I always say, we talk about this all the time, as much as we want to talk about talent and numbers and stats, it's more and more, just like Premier League over here, it's more and more of a financial game. You have to get it all right. It's great that they paid them, but they could have spent that money, parts of that money, a lot better elsewhere.
And look, I'm kind of, as we regularly do, I'm speaking out both sides of my mouth to an extent here, because I do think that the teams who spend really big in free agency are rarely the ones that find longer term success. And yes, there are a few teams who have done, I think like teams like the Panthers and Patriots were so both talent poor and also cap rich that it was okay they went and overpaid.
They had to do something,
guys,
yeah.
Right? But I look on that defensive side of the ball and I see needs at off-ball linebacker, of which there were a fair few available in this window. I see big needs in the defensive backfield, of which a bunch of corners got very similar deals, a lot of whom could have helped this Bengals system. And Al Golden, their new defensive coordinator, they need pass rush help. And look, they are number one in quarterbacks, number one in wide receiver spending. They are number two in quarterback spending. They are 28th in offensive line spending.
And that's where it gets really interesting to me, because we talk a lot also about team building and roster construction. And this stuff isn't boring. This is actually the fun stuff of the inside of the NFL of how these teams are built. And we have such incredible recent evidence with Kansas City, with Philadelphia, San Francisco, when they were in there, how they put it all together. Obviously, the 49ers aren't a Super Bowl contender anymore. But if you look at this Bengals roster and how it, just exactly what you said, where their money is spent, it wasn't that long ago, I was talking with an NFL coach, and I was covering a team, you can probably figure it out, and they were adamant that they were not going to spend big premium money on their star wide receiver. I'm talking about DeAndre Hopkins and the Houston Texans, and the Houston Texans traded DeAndre Hopkins and obviously did not get much for him, and that ended up, at the time, setting the franchise back a couple years, and the fans absolutely hated it. But the Texans and their management were absolutely adamant that you could win a Super Bowl without a number one wide receiver. The Patriots were proof of that. That was the feeling. Cincinnati has gone completely opposite of that. I'm not in any way saying you had to get rid of Ja'Marr Chase. I would have paid Ja'Marr Chase. Some people are obviously worth it in the NFL. But if you're going to do that, you want it to benefit you or have it be 50-50. This doesn't feel 50-50 to me. This feels like the Bengals pushed and pushed because of ownership. They've had ownership issues for a long time now. They left themselves no room, just like the Dallas Cowboys. And I'm not sure that this Cincinnati Bengals team will be any better next year. They're going to put up crazy points. Guess what? They did that last year. Now, if they start better, it's a different conversation. But this is the team. You laid it out perfectly. Well, this is a team with holes. They might lose their best defender. It's a tough AFC, and I'm not sure that the Bengals have really helped themselves this offseason, because we knew Chase was coming back. They didn't add anything with Ja'Marr Chase. He was coming back. They just paid him a lot of money.
It's also the fact that, yeah, Chase, Higgins, Burrow, all great. You pay those guys. And ideally, Trey Hendrickson as well. And like I said, you would have had that money if you'd got this done earlier. But the other moves that they've made this offseason don't make a huge amount of sense to me. You've given Mike Gesicki, who you probably could have got back on a similar deal to what he had last year, 1 year, maybe $5 million. And yet they've brought him back on a multi-year deal in a year where we've got a draft where 20 tight ends are projected to go in the top 100 picks. Yeah. 20. That's
a heavy. I've talked to Matt Miller about that from ESPN. It's a heavy, it's heavy running back and heavy tight end.
And they have paid BJ Hill huge money this year, a guy who underperformed and was injured at a time when interior defensive line is really strong in this year's draft. It's about the way that you allocate. You've got to sit down and you've got to look at the bigger picture. And I'm sure that
the
teams
big board,
do this.
The pie, the big pie.
You look at it and you go, right, we know that we're going to have to allocate these huge funds here, and here's what's strong in the draft, and here's our board for it. We're going to have to let this guy and this guy go. We know that they were contributors to us. We'd love to keep them, but we know that they are cheap and easy replacements with guys on rookie deals who will be earning less than $1 million a year because we picked them in the third round, but they can be a contributor this year. And look, they don't have a wealth of picks. They've got their own picks from rounds 1 through 6, and if Trey Hendrickson does get traded, you imagine that probably is a 2 at this point, with the fact that someone will need to give him a new contract, so that gives them a little bit more help. But yeah, I just, like you said, they are still a contender because, as Joe Burrow said earlier in his career, the Super Bowl window is open while I'm here.
And I love that. And I love Joe Burrow. I mean, Joe Burrow is undoubtedly one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. He's had a bad run recently with injuries and a bad start. I love his confidence. I want, from an NFL perspective, I want Cincinnati back in the playoffs. I feel like the modern NFL is more interesting with Joe Burrow in it. But it's hard, man. I mean, you're not just dealing with the Eagles and the best of the NFC. You're dealing with Lamar Jackson. It's a hard division. You're dealing with Lamar Jackson. You're dealing with Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, who overall aren't going anywhere. The Texans in the AFC South. You look across the AFC. The Buffalo Bills. You got to be better than the Buffalo Bills next year. It's I like their offensive talent. I don't know what else the Bengals have, and they've got to nail the draft, and they've had draft success before, but they're in a tough spot that they also put themselves in. Speaking of tough spots that they put themselves in, Will, what about the Dallas Cowboys? I mean, the beef going on with the Dallas Cowboys. Speaking of teams that overpay their stars, that put themselves into corners,
that wait too long to sign those stars as well,
that have issues, that have drama. The Dallas Cowboys, like, I turn on Twitter for, I take a couple hours off, and I'm like, what is going on? And Micah Parsons, I love that Micah Parsons was called out by a now former teammate, paraphrasing here, but basically, well, you know what, bud? If you spent less time tweeting, maybe you would win more. I was just like, hot bleepity bleep. That is a brilliant, brilliant statement, because I've been thinking the same thing for the last 2 years of Micah Parsons.
If people haven't seen the full interaction that Micah Parsons and now former teammate DeMarcus Lawrence, who's gone to the Seattle Seahawks, who, by the way, still can't figure out what on earth they're doing with their offseason, but DeMarcus Lawrence did an interview and said, Dallas is my home, but I know for sure I'm not going to win a Super Bowl there. To which Parsons responded saying, this is what rejection and envy looks like. And then posted
rejection and envy.
Yeah, amazing.
Like, wow, that's actually like a pretty profoundly bold line. Rejection and envy.
And said this is some clown stuff. To which DeMarcus Lawrence responded, calling me a clown won't change the fact I told the truth. And as just said by Brian, if you spent less time tweeting and more time winning, I wouldn't have left. And DeMarcus Lawrence is already one of those interesting players in the NFL that, like, he can definitely contribute to a defense, right?
Yeah.
And he's got some juice on the outside. He has some health issues, and
he's apparently got some pin-up anger too. Like, he's got something to play for this year.
He is a guy who that has been the case for some time, right? I think there's the two angles to this. There's a footballing side, which we can get to, but when you look at the fact that Jerry Jones didn't speak at the Combine this year, that he has continually just rejected even having conversations about what's going to happen with Micah Parsons' future, when you look at the fact that for a replacement to DeMarcus Lawrence, they brought in Dante Fowler, who had his best year in some time last year, but can't play on running down, so is just potentially useless to you outside of being a situational pass rusher. Like, that and Solomon Thomas is not going to fix your pass rush. There's just nothing about the way that this team operates, considering that, not unlike the Bengals, huge amount invested in their top tier guys, huge amount invested in Dak Prescott,
very top heavy,
huge amount invested in CeeDee Lamb. But realistically, like, what's their big deal been this offseason?
They
re-signing
the Eagles
Turpin
next year. I mean, they're not. Look, I mean, that's the thing.
Getting worse at running back. Javonte Williams, brilliant, great.
I definitely do not agree with everything that Mike Florio says at all. And often I find myself thinking the exact opposite. But I love how Florio has often pointed out in his the PFT stories about recent stories about the Cowboys, and especially for this, and, in general, and I'm paraphrasing, but has pointed out that this team very well won't could not be any better next year. Like, they are appearing to go backwards. Their window very well might have closed. They never even got close to the window. I mean, the window's barely even been open the last few years. There's nothing to say that the Dallas Cowboys will be any better next year. They will get Dak Prescott back, new head coach, a lot of changes, but they're not significant changes that are going to make the football team on the field that much better. And for me, it was fascinating to see, obviously, this tension between two of your star defenders. One leaves, gives an interview to a Seattle reporter, it looked like it was on the field, and basically says and this was what started it all, that Lawrence comes out and says, well, I knew I had to leave the Cowboys because I was never going to win a Super Bowl there. But also said, I love Dallas. This is my home. My family's not going anywhere. I will always be somebody who's tied to Dallas. But he had to get the hell out of Jerry world because he knew that for the remainder of his career, he was not going to win. His words. He knows it better than we do. He was not going to win a Super Bowl with the Dallas Cowboys. To get called out like that tells you what their locker room must be like, the frustration that some players have to have at Micah Parsons. I don't know how the Dallas Cowboys are going to do what they're supposed to do when Micah Parsons is on podcast all the time and responding to everything and getting in the middle of everything. I just don't. You'd have to be the best player in the NFL to make that work, and it's clear that the Cowboys don't believe that he can do that.
What kind of astonishes me about the Cowboys, and this is where it comes down to the similarity with what we're saying about the Bengals, the top-heavy nature, but also they're in that group of people, you mentioned San Francisco earlier, who have painted themselves into a corner at this point where they have to nail the draft, right? The Bengals haven't drafted brilliantly, particularly on the offensive line, a pace of particular issue for them. The 49ers haven't drafted well at the top of the draft, very well in the middle rounds. They find contributors, but they've not hit the stars since really Bosa. That's probably the last first-round pick they really nailed, right? The Cowboys draft really well. It's
even in the middle rounds. They actually draft well in the middle rounds.
As much as we laugh at Jerry Jones on the regular, they are a really good drafting team. And the guys who they're relying on coming back this year to make impacts on their defense. I mean, you hope DeMarvion Overshawn off that horrible injury comes back and is a contributor. But, you're talking about a third-round pick. Trayvon Digg leads the lead in interceptions out of the second round. The guys they've drafted in the last 5 years who are regular contributors are good players.
Dak Prescott was not the number 1 overall pick of the draft.
No, not here, not even by a long shot. But they do this great business in the last weekend of April, and then at no other point in the other 362 days of the year, it feels. They just can't get it right. It used to be a tendency to overpay their own guys. That was the kind of knock on them. Now it feels like it's a kind of combination of doing that, but doing it just too late. And same as the Bengals, that just hits your cap, hits your bottom line, hits your cash flow eventually. And it leaves them in a position where they can't then add through free agency or keep the fringe players who really make up a team.
I thought it was fascinating because I felt like you were getting a peel back behind the curtains of what is really going on within the Cowboys and their culture and what their players think, where you've had, Mike McCarthy and all of those issues, Jerry Jones, the contract, Dak. There is clearly a lack of belief that team is doing it the right way to have one of your star players call out a former star player on Twitter. They're going back at each other. That's probably what it's like with a lot of teams. I mean, it's pro sports, it's egos, it's millionaires, it's a lot of talent. You're some of the most talented people in the world. You have to have incredible self-confidence. You're questioning everything all the time because you want to get better. None of those have to be bad things. But for Lawrence to call out Micah Parsons that much when so many of us have all been thinking the same thing, how can this continue? How can you have one of your best players, one of the best defenders in the NFL when he's healthy, when he's playing at his peak level, just constantly opening his veins about everything on social media? Even in 2025, I don't think that really works. The only person who I can think is a comparable would be Draymond Green from the Golden State Warriors, and Draymond's not Draymond anymore on a basketball court, but Draymond Green has a few NBA championships.
Yeah, exactly.
Love him or hate him, and it's definitely love or hate. There's no between Draymond Green, but Draymond Green proved at one point that he was one of the best in the world. He was on the best team in the world. He has the ability to have that talk. Micah Parsons, on a couple Pro Bowls, that's fine. He hasn't done anything to prove that he can be the loudest talker in the NFL, and he often just comes across really whiny, really overly emoting all the time. He's almost like an emo kid. He's like emo Micah Parsons, and I love that the bigger kid called him out. It was like, hey, dude, shut up, like enough with the tweeting. Shut up and go back. And then, maybe get in the playoffs and you can talk a little more.
Micah Parsons, where are you? That's what we're saying. And look, and just to close that loop, because I think you're right. I don't hate the era we're in where, guys do go and do podcasts and do their own things, because there's some very good ones out there.
There's some great stuff on that,
And like, I think you take the example of CJ Stroud, right? After year one, a sensational rookie season, one of the best we've seen in the last decade. He then did a bunch of appearances and showed just how intelligent he was, and showed how, and he spoke very openly, and he clearly watches the rest of the league, and he's clearly a student of football and all that stuff. And then after this year, where despite going and winning a playoff game, it was clearly a tougher year for them. No, CJ Stroud has been a lot quieter, has been working a lot harder, has been in the facility. We hear all these things.
But what's Micah Parsons doing? Micah Parsons lives on this thing, and I'm like, just... Again, he focuses on his craft. He's incredibly talented. He's very good. But if you're going to tweet about everything and complain about everything and react to everything, you need the foundation there. Speaking of people, Will, who react to everything, who you question them, you love them or hate them, a week later, what is Aaron Rodgers doing?
I know what Aaron Rodgers is doing.
Tell us. I want to know, because I don't know. Other than he's just being Aaron Rodgers for the billionth time.
I know exactly what Aaron Rodgers is. He's excited that the news cycle gets to be about him again. He gets to get all the focus on him. And in some ways, he runs his flag football tournament, which is for charity. I'm not, air quotes for charity is harsh. They raised a lot of money, but it's really an advertisement for his equity firm. And, Josh Allen turns up, and Jordan Love and Jared Goff, and it was all very nice and a nice little kind of off-season media opportunity and everything. But right now, Aaron Rodgers is holding the Pittsburgh Steelers and the New York Giants absolutely to ransom. Those two organizations,
and apparently a little Minnesota Vikings that came out, right? Like from what Ian Rappaport, somebody I saw this weekend when I was off this weekend. I tried to stay up NFL Twitter for 48 hours just for a bit, and I refresh while I'm doing the dishes or getting ready to do the dishes. It's hard to tweet and do the dishes at the same time, I will admit that. And it was like, Aaron Rodgers says that he is interested in the Vikings or whatever, which felt like a very convenient throw out. Then I woke up this morning being like, well, how's Aaron Rodgers going to do the Vikings if they have J.J. McCarthy and they let Sam Darnold go on and on and on? He's still tied to like 3 teams, but no movement. And in many ways, NFL free agency has just been held up because we're waiting on Aaron Rodgers to make his billionth decision.
And look, this is where, when I say it, I joke about the news cycle thing, but this is what I think Aaron Rodgers is actually doing. And we saw it on The Athletic this weekend. And Mike Silver, friend of the show, is one of the people reporting on it. And he's a Cal Bears guy. And he's a guy who knows Aaron Rodgers. And so immediately you attach a name like that and there's credence to this report, right? Aaron Rodgers wants to play for the Minnesota Vikings. He wants to do the Brett Favre trio. He sees that as his best opportunity to go and win another ring.
Does he know that J.J. McCarthy is on the team?
Well, this is the problem, right? He seems to think it's a legitimate possibility. And the Vikings have done nothing to come out
they haven't
and
shot
strike
it down.
that down.
Yeah.
Like, I have to say for Minnesota, as much as I'm a big Kevin O'Connell fan and as much as I like what they've done over recent years, at no point in this offseason, when all the Sam Darnold drama was happening, and is he going to stay and is he going to go, they have never come out and gone, JJ is our guy.
Yep.
JJ is now our starter. I said in this program
last week, I still don't know what to think about JJ McCarthy. Like, there's we don't know. We're going to have crazy training camp reports. He's horrible. He's great. He's great. He's horrible. There's no book right now on J.J. McCarthy. It's been a long time since a guy has actually played in a real game. And if you're Kevin O'Connell, if you're Brian Flores, if you're Justin Jefferson. Okay, if you're Justin Jefferson, who do you want next year right now throwing you the ball? J.J. McCarthy or Aaron Rodgers, who is guaranteed, 150 yards for you, 2 to 3 touchdowns a game? Who are you betting on at this point?
It's interesting that Rodgers, apparently, again, according to the reporting, happy to sign a Darnold-style deal. So
That's
kind of
good to know.
30, 35 million in that range. In a year where you could just end up not in the league
okay
at all.
For him. All right.
Actually, there's a little bit of me that looks and goes, I can get Kirk Cousins for basically the veteran minimum. I'm almost tempted by that rather than Aaron Rodgers. And I have for a long time thought that the Vikings might be the obvious Kirk Cousins landing spot because,
which would be cool. Yeah.
They can get him so cheap, and it's getting a veteran in there because we don't know what state JJ McCarthy's going to be in. Not only from the fact that he's coming off that horrendous injury, but he's still basically a rookie.
Yeah,
he's had a year in the building.
He might be just fine by week 4. But it might take him a ramp-up period, and there's nothing wrong. I like good quarterback competitions. If it's Anthony Richardson
versus Daniel Jones,
that's not a quarterback competition. If it's Brian Hoyer versus Ryan Mallett, that's not a quarterback competition, which I covered in detail. If it is Aaron Rodgers versus J.J. McCarthy, and I remember not that long ago that Aaron Rodgers had the ability to tutor someone and mentor someone in Green Bay, and that didn't really work out very well. If Aaron Rodgers does sign with the Vikings, there's no help coming at all for JJ. It's like, dude, you are on your own. I'm giving you the rookie treatment. You haven't proven anything. I'm Aaron freaking Rodgers. I'm here to win. That's the thing. If he goes to Minnesota, he's going to win right now. You've got a really good defense. They were a contender all year last year. Aaron Rodgers, good Aaron Rodgers, whatever's left in there, the Darth Vader version, is better theoretically than Sam Darnold. That is an upgrade. If he can get back to where he was 2 years ago, coming off injury, it's a huge question mark. I would never touch the New York Giants. We said that. Yeah.
Just whisper it quietly, because people don't want to hear this, particularly Jets fans. Aaron Rodgers was actually quite good in the second half of last year.
Know.
5 or 6 games down the stretch.
Which is why teams are interested. And he's got the whole world betting against him. He knows he's got one more run in him. I've thought all along the Vikings make the most sense. We're not in that room. What does Kevin O'Connell want? What does ownership want? What does Brian Flores want?
He's still, for me, in that system, a little too immobile to run it the way that I think they want to. And I think from a footballing perspective, maybe fits the Steelers kind of, inside zone run, old school, Arthur Smith. I think he fits that a little better. But it is madness to me that he is essentially holding the Steelers to ransom, the Giants to ransom, poor Russell Wilson, who I don't think I've ever felt sorry for Russell Wilson in my life, and yet finally Mr. Unlimited gets a little bit of sympathy from me, because he's just basically sitting there. He had to go and take a meeting with the Cleveland Browns.
On tours. Nobody does free agency tour. When I was an NFL beat writer, it was the guys come in for the day. They come in the facility. You don't want to let them leave. They do their free agency tours. That's cool. That's so old school now. They make a thing called Zoom. We had the pandemic. You have smart. You don't need to go meet with a team. You can sign everything. They do PDFs now. DocuSign. The fact that Russell Wilson had to go around the NFL, meet with, reintroduce himself. It was oh yeah, I'm Russell Wilson. I was this really good quarterback at one point for the Seattle Seahawks. I've had a couple bad years. You can still believe in me. And he still doesn't have a team. And everyone is waiting on Aaron Rodgers. It's hilarious to me. It's hilarious to me that the NFL in 2025, after the Eagles and the Chiefs and everything, that we're still waiting to see what Aaron Rodgers is going to do. And he might not even be that good anymore. I don't know. It's fascinating.
Look, it is fascinating, and we will continue this conversation, I'm sure, ongoing. That when Rodgers actually signs,
let's do something.
I think we will end up doing an emergency podcast. So
emergency video, yes.
Keep an eye out for that, and we'll try and get maybe a beat writer on from the team he's going to, and maybe one for the teams he's not as well. We'll definitely do something.
What are the New York Giants, really quick? What are the New York Giants going to do at quarterback? Because I don't see Aaron Rodgers. Let's say Aaron Rodgers does not go there. What do the New York Giants do at quarterback? Tyrod Taylor?
Maybe that's the Kirk Cousins landing spot.
Yeah.
The problem is that the Falcons decided not to cut him, so
because they're paying his $10 million or whatever. Right?
You've now essentially going to have to trade for him, which was we all thought they were going to cut him before that deadline.
The Giants will likely, I would think, draft a quarterback. Although it's hard to see Shedeur Sanders going number 3.
It's going to be Shedeur. Unless they do something wild and they've really fallen in love with Jackson Dye enough to take him at 3 in the draft, which seems very, very unlikely.
I'm just trying to think, how do they get out? How does Brian Dable, how do they get out of this, their management, when you bring them back? The only way you could sell it is to draft. You don't do free agency. You're not going to get Rodgers. You draft a quarterback and you show progress, and that's how you come back. Because they're going to be coaching. They're coaching for their jobs. That'll be very interesting to watch play out. But we have all next month to get into that in the NFL draft.
Well, as a draft primer, let's finish off this episode with your conversation with the excellent draft scout, draft reporter, Matt Miller, and look, wide-ranging conversation, lots touched on.
He does such a great job.
He is sensational, so enjoy this, and thank you very much for watching, listening, subscribing.
Will, where are you on Twitter?
The bell, all that stuff. I'm at Will Gav.
BT Smith UK. And follow everything at talksport.com and everything that Will does. We... Every week, every day, cover the NFL in the UK because it's 24/7, 365.
But now, ESPN's NFL draft analyst and insider, Matt Miller.
Welcome to talkSPORT's End Zone Rundown. We are honored to have back on this program. We had him last year, and it went really, really well. He is one of the draft experts in the world. Few people, if anybody, knows the NFL draft better than Matt Miller from ESPN. You can follow him at NFL Draft Scout. How's it going, Matt?
Doing very well. Appreciate you having me back on. It's an honor.
Thank you very much. So, look, we're through the combine now. We're early into beginning to kind of get close to the pro days, but all the mocks, the initial ones, are set. And there's going to be movement, and quarterbacks are going to rise. That's how it goes. But you have a pretty good feel now, I'm sure, for where you think the top names, where they at least rank. The guy that I feel like we've been talking about for years now is Shedeur Sanders, obviously from Colorado. So much talent. Some people have concerns. You have the Deion Sanders factor. Somebody's going to draft this kid, and somebody might turn their team over to him, and he could be playing in the NFL for the next 15 years. What is your scouting report? What is your read on him in terms of concerns, potential? What do you believe in Shedeur Sanders as an NFL prospect?
Yeah, well, I think you have to start with the fact that he was a 4-year starter, 2 years at Jackson State, 2 years at Colorado. He elevated each program, which is something that you like to see when a quarterback can come in and make those teams better and do it almost immediately. To build Jackson State, to build Colorado back, it was certainly impressive. He's incredibly tough. I mean, he will stand in the pocket and take hits that a lot of other quarterbacks simply fold when they're hit as hard as he is, but he has that, I think, the love of the game. He has a bit of a chip on his shoulder. You mentioned it. It's impossible to separate him from who his dad is. And I think living in that shadow has given him a chip on his shoulder where he wants to prove that he's his own guy, that he's his own player. He's making his own name for himself. He's incredibly accurate. He's not the most strong-armed quarterback. He's not the most mobile quarterback, but he is incredibly accurate. And he's able to, with good field vision, find his guys. He's able to fire off, bullets to get the ball where it needs to be. I think the biggest concerns are size. He's 6'1". He put on weight for the combine. He got up to 212 pounds. He's closer to 200, 205 pounds is what he played at. Again, he doesn't have the biggest arm. He doesn't have the greatest mobility. What he does is he kind of carves you up from the pocket with touch and timing. Now, as far as over here in the States, there's been a lot of concerns about his personality. Yeah. Every team I've talked to so far has liked his personality. It's this tough line to walk between wanting your quarterback to be confident but not cocky. And I think he's 22 years old. He's very confident. It's in his DNA to be confident, right? I've not heard anyone say that they had a bad interview with him or that he, gave them a negative perception during their 15 minutes that teams get to spend with these guys. These aren't day-long interviews at this part of the process. They're 15 minutes. Yeah. So I would caution everyone. We all remember going on our first date with our spouses, right? Yeah, the first 15 minutes are important. You can get an impression, but they didn't tell you the whole story about them, right? You needed a lot more time to figure out what made them tick and who they are. It's the same with these NFL draft interviews. So we try not to get too carried away about how the first 15 minutes go.
There's a team that I look at right now, and obviously they just acquired Geno Smith for Pete Carroll with that Seattle Seahawks reunion. But I've always thought the Las Vegas Raiders with Tom Brady, the Raiders, they need a quarterback for the future. Somebody with swagger and that could play well in Vegas. Would Shedeur Sanders, would he potentially be a fit there?
That's where I thought he was going before Saturday when the trades happened. That was why I kind of penciled him in at okay, well, if he doesn't go 1 or 2 or 3, he'll go 6. Now And as we're recording, even the NFL is changing every minute, it feels like, with a new trade. I have my Adam Schefter notifications on so I can keep up with everything. But it does get harder to find that landing spot for Shador, just because this musical chairs at the quarterback position, you're kind of waiting to see who's going to be left standing. And it might be him. We see this happen sometimes where teams need to win now. So they go after Justin Fields and they go after Aaron Rodgers. And some of those teams might be a destination for Shador, much like Michael Penix was last year, where the Falcons get Kirk Cousins from the Vikings, and we think, okay, we cross them off the quarterback list, and then they draft someone at 8 overall, and now Michael Penix Jr. will be the starter in Atlanta. So I think with Shador Sanders, it's going to be a similar situation where, if the Giants get Aaron Rodgers, could they still draft Shador Sanders? Maybe not at 3. Maybe they would trade back. But I'm looking at a lot of teams that are in a similar situation of, even if it feels like you've crossed off that need at quarterback, is it still a spot where you would want to be willing to add a young guy? And there's going to be multiple teams. The Jets at 7, the Saints at 9. You get into the teens is where his night could get long, because the teams in the teens are a lot of those, like, they're on the edge. They're kind of a fringe building team. Or you have teams that, like San Francisco, took a shocking step back last year that wouldn't draft a quarterback. So if he makes it past 9, then I think you look at, let's see what Pittsburgh does at 21. Let's see what the Rams do at 26. But that's where you could maybe see a bit of a fall for him.
Very interesting. All right, let's get one more Colorado player out of the way. The other player that everyone is talking about, Travis Hunter, who wants to play 100% of cornerback and wide receiver. I don't know if that's humanly impossible. I love that he wants to do it, though. This day and age where so many guys, they're not going to play in bowl games. They're going to specialize and only play one sport. Travis Hunter will do everything. What is your read on Travis Hunter? Is there any shot that he could still be the number one overall pick in the NFL draft?
I think it's still very much in play, just because we don't know exactly what Tennessee's going to do, or if they're even going to keep that pick at this point in time. I've never seen anyone like him. And I've been covering this sport for 15 years professionally and watching it my entire life. I've never seen anyone like him. Even going back to guys like Charles Woodson, Adoree Jackson, there were linebackers like Miles Jack, who played a little bit of running back as well. I mean, it's unprecedented for someone to play as much as he has on both sides of the ball. He said at the combine he wants to do both in the NFL. I'm excited to see him try. I don't think it's possible. I'm with you. I think the amount of time that it takes to be great at one position, now we're going to double that. And I would worry. I think we've seen this with some guys on defense in the NFL where they come in and too much is given to them. Minka Fitzpatrick is a good example. Isaiah Simmons is another. Guys who were first-round picks, and they were drafted to be chess pieces, and then too much was put on their plate, and they ended up having to be moved to a new team and see their roles change. I would worry the same thing. If you put too much on his plate early, does he fizzle out because he's not able to first establish himself at one position? He has a great mentor in Deion Sanders, who did a little bit of this in the NFL. But for old people like me will remember, Deion didn't really play a whole lot of receiver until 1995. Right. He had been in the league quite some time before he went to the Cowboys and was their number 2 receiver opposite Michael Irvin. But that was the year in which he played the most wide receiver. So it wasn't a situation where right out of college, hey, welcome to the NFL, you're going to have to do double the meetings that everyone else does. That's just, it's not really practical. Now, he's a 4.0 student. He apparently all he does is play football and go fishing. So he has he has the free time, I think, to attempt this. But I don't know that any young player could take on that type of role and responsibility.
It's a great point, and be a Pro Bowler, an All Pro at both. But yeah, if he does it, he's a Shohei Ohtani of the NFL. Right. So when and I think probably everyone in the world, follows you on social media, that follows us, and I've seen you talk a lot about how out of all the different positions in this draft, running back is strong, and we saw last year with Saquon Barkley in the Super Bowl the importance again of the running back position. But you talk about someone like Ashton Yancey from Boise State. There's a couple other names that could actually go in the first round. What are we seeing in this resurgence of running backs in this passing quarterback dominated era? And where do you think could be a good landing spot? Also, speaking of the Raiders and Pete Carroll, they'll need a running back. Where do you think you could see Ashton go in the NFL draft in the first round?
Yeah, running back is back, and I think it's importantly back for teams that have the quarterback position settled. And we saw that, like to your point, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs. They go to teams with starting quarterbacks who are good starting quarterbacks, and they were able to supplement those offenses really, really well. Saquon, I was famously, with nearly a record-setting season. That's great news for guys like Ashton Genty, who could come off the board as early as 6 now that the Raiders have Geno Smith. We saw last year the Raiders, and I know it was a different regime, but they went best player available with Brock Bowers. He had a great rookie season, a record-setting rookie season. Well, I think we could see something similar with Ashton Genty if he's on the board. The Bears felt like a lock for him at number 10 overall until Geno Smith went to the Raiders, which is, I think, as you know, it's what makes covering the NFL so fun, because one move happens and it alters the trajectory of so many different things. So 6 is a spot, 10 is certainly a spot. I think Cowboys fans for a long time were conflicted because they have the number 12 pick and they thought, well, if he makes it, do we want to spend the first round pick on a running back? I don't think they're going to have to worry about it. I think he's going to be gone by then. But you mentioned other names. Marion Hampton from North Carolina, I do think gets into the first round. And then I think maybe one of the Ohio State guys. They had 2, which was why they won a national championship. Quinshon Judkins, who is more of a power back, and then Travion Henderson, who is a great receiver out of the backfield, a great blocker in the passing game. A lot of teams are looking at what the Detroit Lions did with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, and understanding that having that lightning and thunder, or Knuckles and Sonic, as they prefer to be called, having that duo makes your offense just so potent and powerful, especially, in a time where teams are putting 5 and 6 defensive backs on the field 70% of the time. And it has been fun to watch the cycle start to spin of, well, if your linebackers are going to weigh 215 pounds, I'm going to put my 225-pound running back, and we're just going to run over you. And Derrick Henry's been doing it for 10 years, and no one else had really caught on. But it does feel like teams are starting to try to combat the smaller, faster defenses with more of a power game.
So we talked a lot already about the top of the draft, but a team that at talkSPORT.com, they're still our main team, even with the Super Bowl loss. The Kansas City Chiefs, obviously with Mahomes and Kelsey coming back for another year, they're not drafting until the bottom of the first round. But when you look at the offensive line, which had issues obviously all season, when you look at the wide receiver position, which they invested in with Xavier Worthy, but still could potentially upgrade. It's hard to predict the bottom of the first round. That might be the hardest thing to do, but is there a position or a player that you think would be an ideal fit for the Kansas City Chiefs as they try to get back to the Super Bowl and actually take the next step this year?
I think anything but quarterback should be on the table for them, because it is wild how many needs that team had versus how many games they won. Because you mentioned it, another wide receiver, even after they signed Hollywood Brown to the 1-year deal, offensive line. Yeah, almost any position. And we'll see as free agency kicks off what they do at the left tackle position. I'm convicted that they have to get that figured out before the draft, because they might be starting a rookie or first-year starter, at least at left guard. Running back, Isaiah Pacheco seemed to really lose a step after injury last year. Tight into the future could be in play for them. And then on defense, it's defensive tackle next to Chris Jones. They need a defensive end opposite Karlaftis. They re-signed Nick Bolton. So linebacker, you feel like it's okay, but corner and safety were kind of weak spots last year. So they could go, my gosh, numerous directions. I'm going to assume that they have the offensive line figured out by the time we actually get to the draft. And I think going to the defensive line would be huge for them. It's a position that Karlaftis was the first-round pick. Early in Brett Veach's career as general manager, he spent back-to-back second-round picks on defensive linemen who never really got onto the field. And so that is a position where I think they would now like the opportunity to fix that. Walter Nolan from Ole Miss would be so much fun next to Chris Jones to have that speed. I think Derek Harmon from Oregon would be another fit at both defensive tackles, who would be really good players for what Kansas City wants to do defensively. This is a very strong defensive end class. Unfortunately, we might see a run on those guys early. Yeah. If somehow Mike Green from Marshall is there, certainly having that speed off the edge would be really, really important for them.
Well, all right, we'll get one more in for Matt Miller, because he is very, very busy, and he's been very grateful to help us out with everything at talksport.com. You can obviously follow him on Twitter at NFL Draft Scout. The guy who could go number one, who I personally, I'm not sure what to think of, is Cam Ward, who has an incredible story to bounce around college. Incarnate Word, Washington State, goes to Miami, has a huge arm, can be a gunslinger, can make plays, but also can, extend plays too much, which really can hurt you in the NFL. Matt, what is your read on Cam Ward? And would he be the number one pick in any other draft, or are teams so QB desperate now that they're going to overdraft Cam Ward?
I think looking at it historically, we would have to, I mean, maybe 2022 when Kenny Pickett was the first quarterback would be the only other time
Kenny
in recent,
Pickett, number one.
right? And the only time in recent history where I think he would be the QB1 in that draft. Yeah, he's tough to evaluate. I think the positives are like Shador, he elevated 3 different programs. He did get better every year in college. But like you said, he has to play faster. He's going to have to learn to speed up his process. We saw that with Caleb Williams this past year. Like some of that, let me stand around and wait, and I'll just throw it to my guy when he gets open. That doesn't work in the NFL. You have to be able to play on time. He certainly has the athletic ability. He has the arm strength. I love the playmaker mentality, but it has to get dialed in, has to get reined in a little bit. I do expect that he'll be the first quarterback off the board as of today, as we sit here on March 10th. It really feels like everything's trending in that direction, whether that be the Titans at 1, the Browns at 2, or the Giants at 3. I don't think his night is going to be long once we get to Green Bay, which he's probably be thankful for because it's probably going to be very, very cold outside, and he's going to be happy to get off the board early. But it does feel like all signs point to him being the first quarterback and being a top 3 pick at this point.
Matt, we really appreciate you appearing on TalkSPORT again this season, and hopefully we can stay in touch. And everyone follow Matt at NFL Draft Scout. He does a fantastic job for ESPN. Obviously, if you're watching this page, subscribe, like, and I'll be back with Will Gavin soon doing more on TalkSPORT and at talksport.com. Thank you very much.